This is the critique of the third policy debate. Unfortunately, I did this once and I deleted it, so I'm going to do it again. And though I'm rather tired, I hope that it is not too incoherent. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the first affirmative construction. So Oliver, I think one of the things that that is interesting here in your speech is that you talk about how not only companies can fire employees and hire people that have for unpaid internships, and that this creates kind of a larger labor problem. And though you mention this, you never really develop it into a harm. But I think it is potentially a very serious harm that hasn't really been much discussed in other debates, right? That unpaid interns, not only the harm isn't necessarily just with them, right? It's that they affect employment at large, and that the plan potentially solves for this, because the plan requires that all of these aspects of employment are paid, that you can't default to unpaid interns. So I think you would want to have some more evidence to really back that up. I think that could be a potentially stronger harm than some of the other ones that you present, such as the one about like how the employers are harmed by the interns, because you talk about this anonymous lawsuit, and you don't give any instance of what that means. And I don't know, I don't think that there is an instance of this, right? So you don't want to claim a harm that you have no evidence for and which hasn't happened, right? A potential harm that you could see possibly happen isn't much of a harm at all, right? So I think that you kind of have a good harm that you need to develop more, and you should just let go of this idea that employers are being hurt by, though there has a nice parallelism to it. The symmetry is nice. Interns are hurt by the unpaid internships. Employers are hurt by it. You don't have the evidence to back this up, so you have to do away with the symmetry. But I think you could do something better to say that all aspects of the labor market are kind of hurt, that this would be a powerful argument. And we had mentioned before also that when you're presenting statistical information, that you need to really be careful about how you present it, because are we getting averages? Are we getting a median? Is this starting income? What's the source for this information when you're presenting the different incomes for paid interns, unpaid interns, and those with no experience? Not only that, I think that when you present statistical information, this is a certain genre. Statistics, like any kind of rhetorical strategy, make present something that is absent to an audience. But in order for it to take on its full significance, it needs to have a foreground and a background. So we need to see what is prominent and what is the kind of background upon which it should be judged. So should we understand unpaid interns' starting salary of $35,000 as small, or as something that is not enough based on their employment, right? Is it enough to say that they're just less than the paid internship? If it is, I need to hear why, right? Why is it significant that they make so much less? Because if I don't have a kind of grounding in that, it does make it easier for your opponents to come and say, really the difference here is that unpaid interns work in different fields than unpaid interns, and they just, in general, make less. Which is a move that no one makes, but it's something you kind of open yourself up to, and so it's something that you kind of want to preempt and say, here's the real significance of this evidence. The evidence may just do the work for you, but you don't want to rely on it doing that. So you want to kind of prepare the evidence, season it up nice, give it foreground and background, especially when dealing with statistics. So be careful of how you present it. Don't just give us numbers, give us units, give us the source, all of that, but also give us a way to understand the significance of the evidence that you present by attaching it, by showing where it falls in relationship to one of your arguments, and showing the importance of the specific evidence that you're presenting, the numbers that you're presenting. I think that you do a good job in Cross-X, Oliver, when they're like, what's the source on this NACE stuff? And you're like, well, here's the source. Well, they didn't know that was NAC. So here's the source. It was done and then you kind of expand on it. You're like, it was done every 3 years, and each time it was confirmed that unpaid internships are only slightly above those without experience. This is a good use of Cross-X on your part, which is to, if they're just going to throw you a softball, if they're going to throw you a lob, you're going to try to hit it as far as you can, taking advantage of this opportunity to expand on your evidence. On the other hand, I forget who asked this question, whether it's Dale or Russell. You shouldn't just ask a question about the source unless you have a definite kind of follow-up to it that is able to knock it down, right? You might just say, if you really do just need to see the source, right, in order to make an argument, like, can you just give me the piece of evidence, right? Can I see the source, like physically? You can't always do that, so sometimes you just kind of have to leave yourself open if you really need to know that source. But yeah, that's a risk that you take, is that someone might expand on the argument that you leave open to them. Alternatively, you can just kind of shut Oliver off, be like, thank you, I just need the source. Just the source, right? Interrupt him so he doesn't get away with that. Okay, so Dale, the first negative internship, first negative constructive. So I think that you have a nice analogy of how there's an apprenticeship in certain types of work, and that this internship is basically modeled on a kind of apprenticeship, and this is the kind of education that comes through work. But we never really hear much about is this a principle for you, or is this just a definition for the internship? I think it can become a principle for you, right? Which is that there is a certain kind of work. There's a modern workplace that requires training, and that maybe because of the nature of higher education that's not able to provide that, we need to have this opportunity, and that the plan potentially risks this opportunity and disrupts the new kind of training necessary for our workforce. But you don't really make it a principle, you just kind of make it a definition. You're just kind of giving us more information. And this informational genre doesn't go very far, at least with me. Maybe some audiences it does. But the informational genre, you're just kind of like telling us what things mean. Sometimes it even works against you, because it makes me feel as if you think, as an audience member, I don't know what an internship is. So if you're going to give us a kind of definition, you want to make sure that it works for you, not only because you don't want to just waste your time, but you want to make sure that you're not looking like you're just clarifying things for the audience in case they're not following, right? And that is a potential danger, right? That you could put distance between yourself and your audience by making gestures or using arguments for things that the audience already understands. Dale, every speech that you've given in a debate, you make a joke or you go to something that's funny that derails your argument and isn't very effective. And so your story about the plane names with the internship is an example that works against you, right? It's an intern that gets fired for doing something really bad. It's not clear why this is an example in the debate, except that in your research you found something funny and you wanted to say it. So Musashi, in the samurai that I talk about a lot of times, he mentions at one point that a samurai who has a favorite sword will inevitably get killed. Because if you have a kind of attachment to a weapon, you'll use it at the inappropriate time, an opponent will see this and they will kill you. The joke is your favorite weapon. You should not use this, you should get rid of your favorite weapon. The joke, let me put it this way, the joke is not funny. But even more important, the joke is not effective. So precisely because you love the joke so much, you should work on making sure that you argue in such a way that you don't default to a kind of jokey style, because I think it's opening you up to problems in your argumentation that you otherwise wouldn't have. You're kind of focused on the joke too much. So get rid of the jokes for now. I can't believe I'm saying this because I love jokes, but you have to get rid of them. Okay, so Courtney. So you have to do some work you didn't expect to do because you have to say the plan. I think you do a good job kind of not making a big deal of it. You're like, okay, here's our plan. You start right away with it. You need to start right away with it, so good job. When you mention the for-profit companies, you say there's no benefit to the student if they're going to do something that they're not qualified for. I think this is an interesting argument, right? It's not clear how it changes under your plan. And so this is something that you would, if you're making an argument that your plan doesn't address, if it's not a benefit of your plan, or it's not a problem that you're solving, you need to let it go. Okay. So you have a bunch of stuff where you're just kind of saying stuff that's not that clearly related to your plan that you've introduced. So you have the stuff about the graphic artist market, and you have the stuff about the Zomaki evidence about how unpaid internships are a temporary product of a weak economy. It's not clear why that matters. Okay, they're a temporary product of a weak economy. but maybe we're still in the weak economy. Or maybe they once were, but now they're here to stay. I mean, or even if they are a temporary product of a weak economy, why should we pass the plan? Why it doesn't follow that if they are a temporary product of a weak economy, undoing them will give us a strong economy, right? That's a logical fallacy. So you have a lot of evidence that's just not helping you. So you're spending a lot of time on it, and it's not clearly related to your case. So the question just asked is this evidence for why we should pass the plan? If it's not, don't say it. That's the test. Okay. Russell. I think it is interesting that you kind of try to change this $80,000 argument that unpaid interns generally paid interns are generally from families that make $80,000 or more. And you're saying this shows that unpaid interns don't need to be wealthy to make it by. They don't need them. They don't need the money from an internship in order to be able to take it. It's a nice kind of clever twist. I don't really buy it though. And I think I think that you should attack more directly on the equality gap stuff if that's an important argument to you, right? If an argument is, if the argument of the equality gap is something that you think is a voting issue, you need to show why passing the plan is either not going to solve the equality gap or why it's going to worsen it. Just showing that in the status quo, there's a possibility that the equality gap doesn't have the same significance that they say it does, doesn't mean it's not a problem, right? So if you want to argue that it's not a problem, you need to do that more forcefully. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I think you have an interesting argument here when you say that if the firms are mandated to pay, many interns will be fired, and the ones that are being paid would have to do their work. This is a good argument. This is a very good argument. But you don't have any evidence for it. You introduce it near the end of your speech, and we never hear anything more about it. This puzzles me because this seems to me like a really important potential harm to the plan, right? Which is that if the if the plan eliminates unpaid internships, actually this not only does it harm those people that could potentially have unpaid internships, it harms paid internships because now they're taking on additional labor, which potentially make them less educational, which make the work experience more stressful, all of these kinds of things, right? And that kind of double effect is very plausible to me, but I just need to hear more about it. So I'm not sure why you put this at the end of your speech, because it actually seems to me potentially your strongest argument in the debate. And it's the very end of the second negative constructive, and then we don't really hear. I don't remember hearing anything more about it after that. Strange to me. Yeah. Okay, but I think it's a good argument. Should be developed. I think I already kind of talked about how, in the cross-examination here, Russell, you get this question about how would you expect that these, with only 1,000 regulators, there are 135 million employees. I think this is maybe coming from Courtney. And I think I've already mentioned that, okay, 135 million employees, it's not fair to say that this problem has all the employees. We're talking about a smaller number of employees here, and it's the way that you've represented the enforcement problem is a little bit grandiose and not very plausible. But more importantly, Russell's response is, well, in a perfect world, the interns should do adequate research, or they should leave. And it seems to me that this is an important point for the affirmative to take up and say, oh, they should do research. What exactly should this research be? How would you research an internship without going there? Because I think that I think part of the argument that the affirmative is making is there's no way to know. There's an information asymmetry, as economists like to say. There's no way to know ahead of time what an internship is going to be like. And this is part of the reason that internships need to be protected. Because it's kind of a gamble. This is why the government should step in. So I think when you should really attend to the answer and not kind of assume that because you've asked a question that you think is good, that whatever answer that Russell's going to give doesn't really matter, and you're going to continue on your line of answering. So in cross-examination, you really want to listen to the specificities, the language that's being used to answer your question, because this might open a new possibility that you can kind of use. Because instead, what Courtney does is try to ask a Law and Order style question. She's like, if the system is broken, if you're saying that if the system is broken, we shouldn't bother fixing it. And Russell says in response, I don't know how to answer that. If you think, Courtney, that you've got him in a corner and you're like, aha, aha. But I also wouldn't know how to answer that. I sympathize with Russell. I'm like, Or I might even be like, maybe a very kind of sympathetic audience member, like, that's not very nice kind of question. You want the person to not be able to answer the obvious question, the difficult question, not the question that we can obviously tell you're using in a kind of way that's like a poor representation of his position, right? This is clearly a poor representation of his position. Even if it's not entirely inaccurate, it's a poor representation. So if the best representation of his position is what you can weaken, that's the persuasive moment. Right? So it's like, imagine if you're in a kung fu movie, when the your 8 opponents jump down and they try to fight you, if you can knock them all away in a single blow, this is a bad kung fu scene because it's not plausible that your opponents seem too weak, right? If, however, your opponents are too strong, you eventually just barely win, you don't seem that strong. So there has to be this kind of balance in how you're representing the other side's position. That it seems strong enough, but that it's weak at a crucial point that you're able to kind of find, and this shows the skill that you have as a kung fu warrior. Okay. So finally, Courtney in the affirmative rebuttal. You finally tell us that like small businesses will never mind. Okay, yeah, there's a part here in your rebuttal that I don't understand. You're like, well, paid interns will receive $8 an hour, whereas there will be $12 an hour for an entry-level employee, and at least you'll get something for your money from a paid intern. And it's unclear why wage labor is being paid something different here, why they're not at minimum wage. And so you're trying to make a distinction here that you haven't really argued enough for, right? You're trying to make a distinction between paid internships that will come under your plan and the hired labor. But I think it's maybe because you don't really have a way of distinguishing them, and that's something that you should have developed earlier on in the speech. What is going to distinguish a paid internship under your plan from just any old kind of minimum wage job? Is it important that they're distinguished? If not, what's the principle upon which we are, we are passing this plan, right? So all this stuff needs to happen earlier on, and I think because it didn't is why we have this confusion here in the final speech. Overall, I thought it was actually a pretty good debate. We had some kind of confusion, but I think it's a confusing style. But I think that you guys brought in interesting arguments, and I think that you had some moments of like near misses in cross-ex, and some really moments where there was really good evidence and arguments, but they just weren't placed in the appropriate position, and they weren't brought into rebuttal. So it was a debate that was very close to being very good. All right.